3, 2, 1.
What's going on, everyone? You're watching Ash on Comics, and I just read a pretty emotional book. This is Junkyard Joe. It's been a little while in the coming. This is the semi-sequel to GEIGER. If you guys read that, I was a big fan of that. It's GEOFF Johns' book, Gary Frank. And one of the things I really loved about GEIGER, aside from it being a really good story, was that it unveiled at the end that it was a part of this Unnamed thing, and that there were more characters besides just GEIGER, which I thought was really cool that Jeff kept that kind of under wraps. And we just thought we were getting a book about some radioactive guy. You know, it was like a kind of a Mad Max story with a superhero, and it unveils that there's this big war that happens, and there's all these different characters at different points of time in this fictional universe. And Junkyard Joe actually does make an appearance in the GEIGER book, and I urge you to check it out if you haven't. If you like Geoff Johns' work at DC, obviously these aren't the DC characters that you love, but it's got a lot of that similar feel of how he builds worlds and builds up to something epic. And these are superheroes in their own right. A little bit different than we're used to. Now, Junkyard Joe on the surface is not a character necessarily that appeals to me. I'm like, oh, it's a robot in Vietnam. Like, it's the physical aesthetics of it aren't necessarily like, ooh, gotta know more about Junkyard Joe. And his appearance in GEIGER was a bit kind of like a villain. Not really a villain, more of an antagonist. He's an adversary to GEIGER. And there's no indication of why you should care really about him in his own series in that book. So that's another kind of weird thing. You're like, why do I? But let me tell you, if you're like me, don't let that dissuade you. This book is outstanding. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go so far as to say this starts off better than GEIGER, in my opinion. It starts off in the past, 1972. GEIGER, I want to say GEIGER is in 2050. And so maybe it's 2030. I can't remember. It's in the future. But it opens up, and it's a Vietnam story, obviously, 1972. It's 1 year before I was born. And this was a bit emotional. As far as comics can be, one issue of a comic, especially that you've not invested in. It's a lot easier to build to an emotional crescendo when you've had a story, when you know these characters, you've been following them, and things but to start off with the first issue to grab you, that's an impressive feat. Now, Gary Frank isn't one of my favorite artists, but he's a very solid artist, and I do like his work here. He's absolutely top of the game when it comes to like the big two. he's definitely better than almost anyone there these days. There's a few working at the big two still that are top tier, but now before I go in, I grew up as a child of the 70s. My father was a Vietnam vet. I didn't really know my father. He was a Navy corpsman. Now, if you don't know what those are, they're kind of like Marines. They're formerly in the Navy. They train from the Navy, but then they go on foot with Marines, and they're basically the medics. If you've seen any Vietnam films or whatever, when it's like medic or whatever, that's a corpsman, Navy corpsman, and that's what he did. And he served 3 tours of duty. He was one of those kind of guys that after he finished his tour, he couldn't leave his brothers behind. And so he went back and he went back again. And he faced some pretty heinous shit. He had 2 Purple Hearts, I believe. He might have had 3. I'm pretty sure it was just 2. I know he came home and lived the rest of his life with shrapnel in his body. He had Agent Orange poisoning. It messed him up, but he lived into his 70s. And I never got to know him until towards the end of his life. I had, in my adult life, I kind of had my world fall apart about 5 years ago, and I ended up moving back to California from Colorado. And my dad had kind of reached out to me, and he'd never been part of my life, and I'd kind of had a lot of resentment to not having a father in my life. So when he kind of reached out to me, and this was like a year prior to my move, I was just, I didn't want anything to do with him. You kind of build that, like, those walls up. And then something called out to me to say, you know, what am I doing, man? And so when I was moving back to California, I had to drive. So I was like, you know what? I'll come meet you. You know, he was living in New Mexico. And so I met him and visited, stayed with him for 2 days, visited with him, and really regretted not doing that sooner. So you might hear me getting a little choked up. And this book evokes a little bit of that, because when I think of Vietnam, I think of my dad and some of the stories I was fortunate enough to learn about him and his time. I didn't learn a lot. I'm sure it was extremely traumatic, a lot of the things that he dealt with. But I can only imagine. So this book opens up with a platoon of Vietnam, Army guys, and they're just, it's very stereotypical. If you've seen the movie Platoon, it's probably one of the most famous Vietnam films of all time. It's excellent. I absolutely urge you to watch it. If you haven't seen it, it's Oliver Stone at his best. As a matter of fact, I like to pair music when I'm reading comics, especially comics that I really love or expect to love. I like to pair it. So I fired up the Platoon soundtrack while I was reading this, and it really worked well, especially because it's a really emotional, especially the piece called Adagio for Strings, which is the most famous music from that film. But it's just very stereotypical here. There's nothing special. You get introduced to Junkyard Joe, and he looks human here. And what immediately kind of stuck out to me throughout reading this book was, there's dogs licking. I don't know if you can hear on the mic, but I'm still house sitting. But anyways, what stuck out to me here was, thematically, this really feels like Geoff Johns was watching Terminator 2 one day, and he just got this idea, and he was like maybe thinking about Captain America or something. It's Terminator 2 and Captain America kind of mixed. That's what it feels like to me. And when I say Terminator 2, I mean how the T-800, Arnold Schwarzenegger, is reprogrammed to go back and protect John. Junkyard Joe reminds me a bit of that. He's an emotionless robot sent to do something, we don't know what. But throughout the book, he's a soldier here, and he acts like a soldier. He protects his men. And so that's kind of the Captain America thing, right? When I say Captain America, I mean the soldier Captain America, not what he would later become as a superhero, but when he was originally sent to fight the Nazis. Reminds me of that. And the beginning is, like I said, it's just very stereotypical. You're just getting to know these guys, and you're just getting some banter back and forth. You're getting introduced. And, you wouldn't have a Vietnam story without some tragedy and violence. And there's a part here where they're like talking, and each of them got nicknames. So here's a character, Band-Aid. One guy's named Bumbles. The other one's Muddy. And here's a guy talking, and he's like, hey Band-Aid, you got any extra dry socks? Oh, I'm down to my last pair. And just gets his mouth. It's really graphic. Just, the horror of it all. And so we see Sarge here, take cover! And then immediately they're under fire. And Geoff does not waste any time in this book. He spends a couple of pages with some banter, just the guys, and just kind of getting a feel of their personalities. And boom, we're immediately thrown into some action. And Joe here, which he's never called Junkyard Joe actually in the book. They just don't know who he is. He's just, you see his eyes light up, and he's got his gun, check, and he's just like blam blam, just shooting these guys. Like, and presumably he's got night vision. He just can see them through the forest, and he just takes all the VC out here. And this is one of the main characters here, Muddy. He's like, "You all see that?" And then we see the Viet Cong coming out with grenades, suicide. They're like, "Move it!" Oh, they call him FNG. That's right, effing new guy. And Junkyard Joe just runs towards the guy when they're all running away. He's like, "Hey, you're running the wrong way, fool!" And he tackles them, and the grenade blows up. And they're just like, "Wait, the new guy, he just jumped on that VC," and they're kind of all solemn because they expect him to be dead. And here we get the famous or the evocative, just like in the first Terminator, right, when he comes up from the flames and dun 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 dun. Now he's not really like Terminator in that sense, but it just thematically, like, or at least aesthetically, it has those feelings. I can't believe it's not somewhat intentional a little bit, right? I can't believe that Geoff Johns is just completely ignorant and just being like, "What? Some guy named James Cameron made a movie called I never heard of it." Like, it's different enough that I think you can get away with some of these homages and not have people go, "Oh, you just made Terminator in Vietnam." It's not, it's not like that at all. But the robot part, and they're just, of course, now all surprised. And there's a really cool bit here that when I was reading the book, I kind of skipped over. But when Junkyard Joe's being put into the team because he's replacing a fallen soldier, the sergeant's just like, "What is this? We got a new guy." And they're like, "Well, I'm sure he's got papers that'll explain everything." And the sergeant's like, "You keep those papers where I can't see them. I don't give a shit who you are. Like, you just keep your gun clean and your ass down," or he says something like that. And so you don't see the paper. Who is he? We don't know. What are the papers? And then he's like, "Sarge, where did his paper say he was from?" And then, of course, we see them burning right here. So now we know, as a reader, you're like, "We'll never know because the papers are burned." And that's one of the cool things about this book is that it kind of just throws you into the story. There's none of this, "Oh, once upon a time there was a robot named Junkyard." Like, it doesn't just boom. We're in Vietnam. He's got these. So who are these guys? And I really like that. I really love this throw you in the middle of the story and try to figure out what the heck's happening. And so now Junkyard Joe is coming out, and he's just clank, clank. He's just the metal form, and he strips the clothes of the Band-Aid. And he's like, "He's going through Band-Aid's things." And presumably this is where he's going to get his name Junkyard Joe, because now his uniform, he's Joseph. That was Band-Aid. He takes it and clothes himself in that. And they're not sure what to think, but he's just, like a robot, back in service. And he never talks. And it's interesting to see like how these guys, they react, and they're pretty scared of him, actually. They just saw what he did. He's a robot, and eventually the sergeant has to calm him down, and basically he's like, "Any of you don't want it on our side after seeing you shoot like that?" And they're just like, "What?" So they kind of accept him, but begrudgingly. Just they don't want him as an enemy. What are they supposed to do? They don't know. They're like, "What the hell? We've never seen a robot." And he's a machine. And here's another scene kind of out of Terminator 2. If you remember in Terminator 2, where the T-800 would just sit there at stand guard, and it would never tire, never sleep. There's a scene just like that here where they're noticing him, and he's like, "Man, he's not even bothered by this." And Muddy, who seems to be like the main human character here, he kind of goes and tries to befriend him and talks to him, and invites him back to come in. And Junkyard Joe, who again, they don't call him that yet. I'm just calling him because that's the name of the book. He comes back, and he makes an appearance. And again, he's not talking, but you can see that maybe Muddy's making a connection to him. There's some sort of emotion to the character. And this is all fantastic as the reader, because you're wondering, who is this robot? Like, why is he even here? We don't know. These guys, how they acting to him, you're feeling for these guys. There's a lot of humanity. I think it really works in Jeff's favor, too, that, especially for someone my age, maybe younger readers may not have this, but I was brought up in this sort of Vietnam culture, and, like, in the 80s, the late 80s, early 90s, like, after Platoon, there was a plethora of Vietnam movies coming out. It was that my father's generation, that was kind of their time, and they were kind of where my age I am now, and the world was really kind of having a retrospective of Vietnam, and so it was just in the culture, and we were exposed to it. So when I read this book, I'm recalling all the emotions and the ideas that I've been made to understand through previous works of art, like Platoon, like Full Metal Jacket. I'm trying to think of other, like Hamburger Hill. There's been various other stuff too, and of course other war movies that aren't Vietnam still have something to say on the subject too, like Saving Private Ryan, etc. Just war movies, what it's like to be war is hell, and these regular people having to be thrown into it. So that really, what I'm trying to say is, it really worked to the book's favor, and for me to just build this emotion. Like, I was really caring about these guys and what's going on, and then we come to this scene where there's this big, I don't know, it's a water buffalo. I'm not sure what kind of creature that is. I think it's a water buffalo, and they're just like, "Oh, Sarge, what?" And it's just staring at him. And one of the guys in the platoon's just like, slap this thing out of the way. And he comes up and gets close, and he sees it's got a bomb strapped to it. He's like, "Oh no, it's a boom." And I just love Geoff Johns. It's just a good writer. All he does is just label here, matches, Big Jack. I think that's so crucial to this particular scene, because you see people getting blasted, but now it's personalized. It's important that it's not just random soldiers dying. Like, Geoff Johns goes out of his way, and that's really the point of this book, is to build these characters. And hopefully, if you haven't read this book yet, stop. I'm spoiling so much of the experience for you. Obviously you're going to do whatever you're going to do. I just want to give you fair warning. You can always come back to the video. It's not going to go away. And I do appreciate the views, but I'd rather you have a great experience with the book. And the explosion fells a tree, and it collapses on Joe. Right? You see him down here. And Muddy goes down. And it's a trap. We see the Viet Cong. It's just ambush. Boom, 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 boom. And just then we see Sarge gets hit. And Green. And just everyone is just like, and and scenes like this, just heartbreaking, because it reminds you that these are just kids, right? Vietnam, they weren't sending Sergeant Rock over there. They were sending 18-year-old high school grad. You just got out of high school, right? And you're going over. And a lot of these guys weren't volunteering. They were getting drafted. And they were just going and experiencing this stuff. And the voice of this kid here, just, I want to go home. It's tearing me up. And we see Muddy. Muddy's just a really good guy. Really just, he's one of those tender-hearted souls that you'll see when you read the book. And he's just bleeding because he got knocked in the head. And he's just watching it all. And then Bumbles gets murdered. And it's just so tragic. You're like, all these guys that the book introduces you to, all of them, are just getting killed. You're like, what the hell? This is hardcore. Like, what? We know that the robot's not, but we almost don't care about the robot because he's a robot. And whatever he was sent to do, he doesn't seem to be doing it because he got a tree knocked onto him. But in heroic fashion, we see him. He doesn't give up. He's lifting that tree up. And just about before Muddy's about to bite it, we see the bayonet come in. And boom. Just a gore. Just, man. Robot comes in, and of course they're freaked out, like, what the hell is that? Run! And so they flee, and Joe picks up Muddy and takes him off, and he's lying down. He's like, they killed him, Joe? And this is the first time he calls him Joe. And I think it has to do, in retrospect, as I'm reflecting on this book, I think it has to do, he's probably a little bit delirious from that hit on the head. Because he doesn't think he's Joe, but we see here he's Joseph, right? And so he's probably not 100% coherent. They killed our friends. And this is hearkening back to a previous piece of dialogue when they talked about being an angel. And he's, if an angel sent you, why'd they send you here? Why'd they send any of us? And Joe, he can't have any emotions. He's just got that stoic robot face. And then we hear a voiceover radio. Unit Beta. Mission is over. Head south to base. He looks south. I repeat, Unit Beta, head south. And then we hear another voice. They killed them. Joe. They killed our friends. Unit Beta. And so this is even heavier spoilers. So if you still have an option to stop and get the book and have things not totally revealed. Not that there's major twists, but it's saved some surprises. And so Junkyard Joe decides to head north, and we hear that voiceover. Damn it, he's heading north. Unit Beta. So now presumably Junkyard Joe is a creation of the government, which I was kind of a little disappointed at that, because it's like, really, the government in the 70s could make something this advanced? I mean, back in the 60s, we would have written comics like that, but in the 2020s, it just, I don't know. I was hoping he was kind of like alien technology or something, but maybe he still is. I don't know. And so Junkyard Joe goes north, and he tracks down the VC, and he just comes in like a Terminator, like Vietnam, Captain America, Terminator, just starts killing, throwing grenades, and it's just boom, just massacring. This is a great full-page spread, just showing him boom, 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 blowing. Oh man, this is Gary Frank earning his paycheck, and I love this no-look shot over here, where he's just shooting, turns, looks, sees the kid staring at him. But look, he's clutching his chest, bleeding, collapses, and now he's dead. Apparently, Joe's eyes reflects it all. Yeah! Mother comes running out. He stares at her, sees her clutching a dead son. Joe's just staring, looks at his gun, and tears his gun apart. Falls to his knees. And it stopped transmitting. And then we cut over to a bunch of scientists. Unit Beta finished its analysis of the war, Mr. President, and it shut down. No, it shut down? What the hell does that mean? It means this war is unwinnable. We need to end it, Mr. President. Prepare the 8-point peace plan, Henry. Notify President Van Thiel. America is leaving Vietnam. So we're supposed to get out of this that the robot was there to assess the war. It was some sort of, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I just read to you what the book gives us. That was kind of weird, threw me off. I was like, oh, okay, well, interesting. And then we cut over to Muddy, who's now in a hospital. He's talking to the doc, and he's trying to tell him about this robot, and no one believes him, of course, right? Which is cool. I like that. It's like me as a reader, I can't believe it, And this doc's like, look, man, you got to stop talking like that, because they're going to send you home the way you don't want to go. Like, basically, don't be cuckoo. And you can see, no, he's sad. All his friends are dead. His platoon, he's going home now, which is what he wanted originally at the beginning of the book. But now he can't even, no one will believe him about Junkyard Joe, which saved his life. And, yeah, so At the very end, we see the mail sergeant come in, and he's got some letters. Now, at the beginning, he was writing a letter to his girlfriend, who he said he was going to get married to, and there was no letters that came to him. And so you're like, oh, okay, what's going on with that? So here at the end, he gets some letters. I'm not sure. We'll learn probably more. And then you get the final frame, which shows, oh, Muddy is an artist, and he's drawing what he calls Junkyard Joe. And he calls him Junkyard Joe because the name of that platoon were the Junkyard Joes, like G.I. Joe. They're the Junkyard Joes, and now they're all dead. So that's kind of an interesting way for Muddy to honor his fallen brethren, and with this guy. And I do know a little bit of spoiler from reading some of the solicits and things about this book, is that this is going to be a story about Muddy telling about this, and I believe it's going to jump to the future. So it's going to be kind of like a kind of meta comic about a comic artist. I'm very, very curious to see where that goes. In fact, when I read that solicit, it made me a lot more interested in the book, because I was like, I don't just care about a robot fighting in the Vietnam. Like, how interesting can that be? But this book was fantastic. Fan-freaking-tastic. Now, at the end here, we get some veterans dedications. We get a dedication from Geoff Johns' mother to a grandfather. Everyone involved in the book does a dedication, which I think is great. And then we get, there's a special edition of this book that's a black and white issue, which apparently will, they donate all the proceeds plus $2 for every one of those issues sold. So if you want to help Mad Ghost donate to veterans or whatever, buy the black and white edition, and those proceeds will be donated to veterans, and an additional $2. So that's pretty cool, I really think. If I can find one, I'll probably buy one. And then tribute to Pat McCollum, who was I believe he was one of the founders of Wizard Magazine. Here it is. You can see for yourself. He passed away in 2022. Rest in peace. So here is the cover of the GEIGER trade. If you haven't got it, highly recommend. GEIGER was fantastic. It was a little bit of a slow burn to build up, but once it got to like the final 2 issues, it was just really great. Very heroic book. I'm super excited about this. Geoff Johns just won me over. This was just an emotional ride. I was really getting into these characters, and like I said, there's just something about Army stories anyway. You know, there's those certain types of stories that just, they get you. I think baseball stories, for whatever reason, I'm not a baseball fan, but like every baseball movie I'll watch, because 99% of them are great. There's something about telling a tale in baseball. It just lends itself so well. Same thing with military. I think there's so much trial and conflict and trauma and everything in a war story that it just lends itself so well to stories. So hopefully this gave you a lot of information of whether you want to check out Junkyard Joe or not. This is a fantastic issue. This was a rare 5-star rating for me. I cannot find any fault in what this book did. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be your favorite book. Obviously, we have our own subjective tastes. You know, if you cannot stand war stories, probably you're not going to like it as much as I did. However, if you've ever liked a war story, if there's ever room in your heart to possibly, this one might win you over. It's a really well done, solid art, outstanding writing. You can't ask for more. This is what, I don't want to say this is what comics are all about, but certainly what war comics are about. I can't praise this enough. 5 stars is as tops as it goes. I don't give out many a year because I try to save them to really award the best of the best. So when I do give them, I hope you understand. I don't just throw them out willy-nilly. Thumbs up, Jeff. I cannot wait. The way that this issue left off, it was making me going, I want to read the next one, which is both agonizing but also super rewarding, because for 6 months I'm gonna be on for that ride, and that's to me what comics are about, is that periodical I'm trying to think of the endorphin rush. That's it. Anyways, you know what I'm saying. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, leave something in the comments. Thumbs up, thumbs down. If you don't want to see more of my videos, probably thumbs. By the way, when you thumbs up or thumbs down a video, do really consider doing it all the time. Even thumbs down, it's for you. If you want to see more videos like this, not just from me, but similar people, thumb it up so the algorithm sends you recommendations based on your taste. If you hate videos like this, I mean, you probably not made it this far, but thumb it down. I don't care. You're not hurting my feelings if you thumb it down. I'm a little bit, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't take it personally, but it's for you so that YouTube, I thumb down videos all the time, and it's not necessarily because they're bad videos, just because I don't care. I'm like, it's not what I'm into. So, anyways, I don't know why I'm encouraging people to thumbs up my video. Leave a comment though, whatever you want to say. Just try not to be too jerky. If you got some negatives, try to sugarcoat the negatives a little bit. But thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.